I'm Eric Lane, and I'm here with playwright Becky Mode at Little Purity, which is a diner in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And we're here to talk about Becky's wonderful play, Fully Committed. The play, just to give a little background for people who are listening, the play premiered at ATF in 1998, correct?
Yes, we think.
And that was followed by a production off-Broadway at the Vineyard, and then the play moved to the Cherry Lane, and then it's moved on and been produced all over the world at this point, which is pretty wonderful and amazing. Crazy and great and totally deserved. And Fully Committed is going to be returning to ATF in a production this summer as part of ATF's 20th anniversary season. So pretty wonderful and pretty great.
Note to self, I have to make my plans.
Yep. So for people who don't know the show, could you tell a little bit about what the show is about?
The show is about the lowest man on the totem pole at the most desirable restaurant in New York City, and about the reservation and how he manages this stream of New York elite and over-entitled as he struggles through his own struggle to be an actor, an underemployed actor in New York City.
I was rereading the play the other night, and it's a one-man show, and yet the one actor is also playing 40 wildly different characters, all of whom have this incredible need to get into the restaurant. So it's kind of a great piece. It's an incredible challenge for the actor. It's a great ride for the audience.
Hopefully.
Well, it has been every time I've seen it and rereading it. And what's interesting to me, it's a one-man show that doesn't feel like a one-man show because he's playing these other 40 characters at the same time. So it's anchored by one person, and yet it feels like this incredible experience of all these characters parading through for maybe a moment, or keep calling in, keep coming back. It's really kind of a great accomplishment. So
thank you. Well, it was inspired by Mark Setlock, Mark Setlock's talent, among other things, because he had a talent for embodying many characters, and we worked together in a sort of real-life version of this restaurant. And at the time, I thought, I would pay money to listen to him do these people, and he fully realized them. And so, if it feels like a play and not just a one-person show, it's partly, a tribute to his abilities.
And also to the writing, because what really is great reading it was how quickly you guys established these characters in just a line or a sentence or a couple of sentences, how distinct and unique those characters are, and how rapidly they're established. That's pretty great.
Well, thanks. One of the things that's funny, thinking about it again, is it's an interesting exercise because everybody calling up wanted one thing. And so, at least from that perspective, they may have wanted, obviously, many other things in their lives, but in the immediate sense, you always knew what everybody wanted. And that's kind of fun as a writer. Like, everybody wants the same thing, they go about it different ways, and they bring different things to bear, but they all just wanted that table, which is part of what was, the inspiration for the play. Here we were in the mix of all these people in New York City who had everything they ever wanted in their own little kingdom, except that table.
Which he is controlling.
Yes. Right. Which, a schlubby actor with no money decides, who gets it. So that always just struck us as kind of a fabulous place to be, just from a creative perspective. It was amazing to live it, and then it was really fun to write about it.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the development of the play.
Sure.
I was lucky enough to see, I was saying to you earlier, I got to see the first public reading of it at the Atlantic Theater, the workshop at ATF. I didn't see it at the Vineyard, but then I did get to see it when it was moved to the Cherry Lane. And rereading it, it's funny how I could hear Mark's voice doing all these different characters as I'm reading it 16 years later.
Amazing.
It was pretty great. Pretty great. But could you talk a little bit about the development of the piece, where it came out of the experience at ATF and how that was part of the overall development of the play and its journey?
Well, it began in the basement of a real-life restaurant where we both worked. We were both reservations, but I did a lot of coat checking too, and he got me the job. We were grad school buddies.
Oh, really?
We went to acting grad school together, and you trying to act and write. And I wasn't writing at the time, but acting in New York City, you need another job, a day job, unless you have a trust fund.
Yep.
And we really, it just struck us as the most extraordinary environment. I just felt like, I can't believe I'm here paying witness to this. And, or bearing witness to this, I guess. And Mark, because he was so sort of vocally facile, we'd be sitting next to each other at this long table in this garret in the basement, and we would hang up the phone, and he would sort of do a little imitation of one of the callers, and he would entertain us, like just wildly entertain us. It wasn't just imitation, it was just the idea that then we would develop these archetypes, and we would have a little list of them, sort of points on the phone, so that it would be sort of Upper East Side housewife, celebrity assistant, Long Island housewife, Southern tourist. It would be like that, and we would just point to one of those on the phone. And sometimes we would sort of mischievously transfer calls to each other. I don't want this one, you can have this one, and you would just hear their voices all day long. And then, Mark would do his little side performances. And just one day I had the idea for Fully Committed. This should be a play. It should be a one-person show, and you should be doing the phone and do all these voices. And it took me, I never sort of had an idea sort of fully blown like that. I was like, this is how it should be. Because what we were experiencing should have been a play.
Of course.
And I'd never written a play, and Mark thought it was the dumbest idea ever. Ask him. And I really had to work on him to do it. I just think, natural modesty, why would anyone want to hear that? Not really knowing what I meant. But he went with it, and we were very, very close friends and still are. And we would meet in my apartment and improvise scenes. And I would type them up and then sort of cull from there. In the early days, we would sort of then read them aloud and hear how they sounded. And we would both play parts. He was much better. And that was in the very early days. It was just he and I in the room and a tape recorder. And then after a couple of those, I just sort of went off and started developing characters for him, and then I would have him read what I wrote. It was kind of an ideal, like a sort of an ongoing ideal workshop situation where I would write a scene, and then I would have him read it, and I would go, oh, this works, this doesn't. And he was very generous with me, because I was just starting out. I don't know what the heck I was doing. And but we always had fun, and it was also that real thing of, we enjoyed these restaurant stories, and people, at parties and, just hanging out would enjoy them, and it felt like part of the task was telling those stories, not just embellishing them, but finding a bigger story. And that was the real challenge of Fully Committed. So it began as sort of all these disparate scenes, and then the real challenge for me was finding the character at the center of those scenes and finding a journey for him and an arc for him. So I guess that would be phase one, I would call my apartment. And actually we did a reading in my apartment. So at one point I just, I'm doing this all backwards. So then at one point, this is while Mark was workshopping Rent and then going to do Rent, and a friend of ours who worked at the time did a story on Mark for the then City section.
Oh, really?
And the story was basically Boulay Booker takes his last call. And because Mark was going into Rent. And this was while we were developing Fully Committed. And from that article, David Stone called us up.
Oh, really?
It said in the article, it said they're currently working on a one-man show about the experiences there. David Stone saw that he called up. David Stone was always involved, I have to say.
That's interesting.
And maybe I had sort of written half of it at the time, and it was like, ooh, better finish, which was amazing. And we went in and talked to him, and he was like, I'd love to see it when you're done with it. I mean, that was sort of the involvement at first. I think it's a great idea for a show.
Yeah.
And that was definitely inspiring.
Yeah.
So I finished it much faster than we had begun, and it was long and unwieldy, and we did a little reading in my apartment with my then boyfriend, now husband, on Union Street, and maybe there were 8 of us, like our upstairs neighbors, a friend, and we had a little toy phone, and it was so great.
Yeah.
I mean, the play wasn't great. Mark was great, but we really felt like there was something there. The play was long and unwieldy and not even a play. But I remember feeling just with those 8 people like, this could be good. These work. But this could be good. And then from there, I think next stop might have been the reading at Atlantic. Might have been sort of more of the same. Of sort of, culling and shaping and stepping back. I think we did a little reading of it at New York Theater Workshop at the time. And
I went to that also. I remember that also because it was downstairs, and I remember that as well. Yeah.
I mean, we really had. I feel like we had the best of what New York Theater has to offer in a way that I just remember Jim Nicola. I still remember him telling me something like, make sure that it's some version of, it's very easy to make the customers into sort of the over-entitled assholes and the workers sort of virtuous and pure, and make sure to blur those lines and really explore some version of that. Yep. But I just remember he sort of challenged me to, even though it was a comedy, in many ways a broad comedy, we had already been guided to sort of think about who Sam, the central character, was and what his journey was and where he was going. But I really felt like, just in terms of messaging and making it not too simplistic, Jim really, there were words of wisdom from that reading, even though that was sort of a stop along the way. And then I believe from there, and Martha and Mark had always been friends. Could it be that was the next step? And I guess the other step along the way is that Nikki Martin came to the reading at the Atlantic. David Stone was like, well, maybe it would be good to connect you with the director. I will say in advance, Fully Committed also just had some charmed, it really had some charmed elements. Like David Stone reading that article, I don't know when I would have finished the play if he hadn't called, and connecting us with Nikki Martin, who's a fabulous partner, and being able to do it at the Atlantic and the New York Theater Workshop. I appreciate the luck that play had.
Well, and it also seemed, from that first reading at the Atlantic, I remember there was a certain energy in the room that was, this has a life. This has it had this incredible, just a response to it, the energy of the piece itself. There was something very special about it from the very beginning. And I felt that being in the audience. This is going on. This is going to have a very full life ahead of it. We don't know what that is, but it's happening. Well,
having never had that experience before, I felt that, even, with the usual skepticism and self-doubt and all that. I felt like, this is fun, and there's something to, there's something. And so we met Nikki, I think, after the Atlantic. So maybe did he go? Maybe he went to part of it, and then he read the rest of it, and he was just delightful and fabulous, and such a great match for the material and for us. Forgive me, my sequencing, I'm sure, is all wrong, but I think the sort of next big step for that was, but we felt like it needed to really not be a reading, but be a workshop, and be up on his feet, and at the time, Nikki couldn't do it, but his assistant or, collaborator could, and so we went up to the Adirondack. And put it on, which is amazing. And then again, it was all very surreal. But the idea that suddenly having cooked up this cockamamie thing, that it was actually going to have a bunch of performances with an audience, was sort of, it was surreal.
Yeah.
And fantastic. Surreal in a good way. But it was also scary because one of the things I remember about going up there was thinking, like, this is a New York City audience. I'll tell you, this is interesting.
Yeah.
And I remember even David Stone saying, like, I think this is a New York. This is a New York City play with a New York City run. Like, it will be the kind of thing it will be. Not in a demeaning way, but just in a way of saying, like, it feels very much like
New York
centric.
Yeah.
And it felt a little scary to go upstate and to think, like, these are not going to be sort of super it's not going to be a big restaurant world. It's not going to be a big it's not going to be filled with celebrity watchers and wannabe hipsters.
And it's not going to be the people who are trying to get that reservation in New York City. It's going to be a different audience.
Exactly. So it felt scary, like, what if we just completely fall flat on our faces there? And I'll never forget. And there were different audiences there, among other things. It wasn't just one kind of audience.
Sure.
So that was fantastic. But I'll never forget, there was an audience that was a lot of senior citizens, and just thinking, these are retirees who really aren't part of the scene that we're writing about. Like, maybe we'll just be terrible, and they'll hate it, and they'll hate us, and there'll be no laugh. They were a fantastic audience. We had a talk back afterwards. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Sophisticated, warm, responsive, and what I remember thinking two things. One is that, you should never condescend to your audience or make assumptions about what any audience will do.
Yep.
But also, really, like, at the heart of the play is the story. There are comedic moments, and it's about the restaurant world, and it's about entitlement, but it's also just about sort of struggling through a really hard job and coming out at the end of it.
Yep.
And I felt like that's part of what they responded to, and it was just not just a relief, but it was exciting.
Yeah.
And if you take that as an omen, the truth is the play's done really well outside of New York City. And in places that you would never expect for it to do well, all over the world, and Estonia and Tennessee and Japan and Florida, and places where they may or may not have a crazy sophisticated food scene, but for some reason it strikes a chord. And so that I will never forget that audience and that talkback.
Yeah, and I've had similar experiences at ATF with a talkback about the show where they've been some of the best audiences and best talkbacks I've ever had. And I think part of the reason is working a lot in New York City, you do readings, and a lot of what you get in a talkback is, here's what I would do to fix your play and write it the way I would write it. And
of course.
And up at ATF, I feel like the response is more, it's more of an emotional response. It's more, here's how I felt, here's where I connected with the piece, here's where I got lost. It's stuff that as a playwright is really helpful for you to have those moments and places pointed out, and then let you as the writer fix them or figure them out, or see, let me take a look at that and see if there's something that needs to be adjusted or strengthened or moved or whatever. But I'll never forget also doing this reading. It was the same year that you did Fully Committed. It was a reading of a play of mine called Times of War that was being workshopped and then went on to be produced there the following summer. It was the best reading of a play, best discussion of a play that I've ever had in my life, because the play took place over the course of 3 different wars, from World War II up until the present at this point, when I went on and rewrote it. And the responses people had were so genuine. And people talking about, one section took place during World War II, and a woman talking about being born during World War II and not seeing her father until he got home from the war. There was a section taking place in the mid-'90s that dealt with AIDS, and a couple talking about someone who they knew who had AIDS and the experience of going through that. And clearly it was an experience that they had never spoken about in public. And the sense of generosity and honesty and compassion that they brought to that discussion. I remember Martha, Dave, and I afterwards all saying that was like absolutely the best discussion we've ever had. So we came back to New York. We're doing we did another reading of the play. We're having a discussion, and we're all like, "This is going to be great. This is going to be great." And the discussion starts, and it's like, "Here's what's wrong with your play. Here's what you should change. Here's how I would do it. This should be this." All of this stuff that really wasn't helpful, and we kind of ended the discussion pretty quickly because I kind of feel like as a writer, you want that understanding of how an audience reacts, what they're connecting with, what they don't. And I feel like up at ATF, I always get that. I always see that and feel that and hear that, and then it allows me or you as a playwright to go back and then incorporate that, see if that's a comment unique to that one particular audience member, or if that's a consistent comment.
Completely. Actually, now that you say that, what I remember this woman getting up and talking about her job and saying basically the delight she took, like, if only I could say to my boss just once. And the job was entirely different. The boss was entirely different. But that's when I just thought, no, it's, on a very basic level where people relate and where we have to remember the emotional heart is having a job you don't want to go to and working for somebody you can't stand working for. And so many of us at so many different junctures experience that. And she was expressing it so, like, in such a heartfelt way. And sort of like, thank you for doing that. I got tremendous, I identified, I laughed, and I have a very different situation. And that was, beyond useful information to us because, without that, it's sort of nothing.
And one of the things I also felt rereading the play, I just reread it 2 nights ago, was it's 16 years later, and the play, if anything, is more relevant because, well, first of all, so many of us do those jobs. There's the job that we're doing for another reason, whether it's because you're an aspiring actor or aspiring playwright, or because you have kids and you need to do this job because you need to pay your mortgage and you need to take care. That's universal, and that will always be universal. But the whole culture of celebrity and celebrity chefs and the number one restaurant has kind of exploded. And so, if anything, I kind of felt like all of this feels even more relevant. Sometimes you read a play and it's 16 years later and feel like, that's not quite, that was another time. This feels really, really as relevant, if not more so, which is great. Totally great.
What's funny to me are the people. The people have changed, right? Some of the celebrities,
some of the names.
But
some of them are still the same. A few of them,
that was another one of our great pleasures, is because we, I think we felt like, we evoked all these celebrity names in the spirit of fun and satire, but we always sort of wonder, how will some of the real life people feel? And, Bernie Gersten, who was in, he comes off, as a good guy. I guess his friend comes off pretty haughty. But, his fictionalized friend. But he came and loved I think the people, all the people that we knew in the play, Henry Kravis, some of those celebrities that we peppered in took it in the spirit that it was intended, which, hopefully wasn't mean-spirited.
No, not at all, and it doesn't feel that way.
But I think those people enjoyed it, enjoyed their own legend. I don't know about Naomi.
Yeah, that was the one I thought.
We never heard from her. We never heard from her lawyers either.
Well, that's good.
But that's a funny thing about the actual, celebrity culture. Always stuff there.
So, is there anything Do you feel like the play has changed or has changed over the years, or the response to it has changed, or can you say?
I don't know that. What I know is it's, the Vineyard had an anniversary, and Mark did a reading of it there for a benefit there last year, I think. And it was great to hear Mark. I hadn't heard Mark do it in so long.
Yeah.
And I was reminded, as I would be periodically, to real workout for an actor.
Oh yeah.
God. Cruel almost.
Cruel and wonderful.
Cruel and wonderful, exactly. I hope. But I remember in the beginning, I guess, to me it was more about letting go than really monitoring what the response is. My dad, of course, keeps a Google News alert and will often let me know when Fully Committed is at some playhouse here or something, and he knows before I do sometimes. But I remember in the beginning feeling very... knowing every rhythm of how Mark said every word and loving it, being so married to it. And then it was very odd when other people started to do the play. The play is so identified with a single actor and co-created by and, inspired by. So it was very odd when we started getting other performers. And wonderful, too, because then you could see, I remember somebody, my dad, I think, again, saying, you'll be lucky if, you get terrible people performing Fully Committed all over the world. I don't know about that. And, of course, none of the actors have been terrible. They've been wonderful, and it's been amazing to see people do it. I mean, they did it in France a couple of years ago.
Oh, really?
And I watched the production all in French, and I have no better than, rudimentary high school French, by a very, very skilled actor who comes from, both of his parents were actors and mine. He was amazing. And though I didn't understand a word of it, I could see when he was playing each one.
That's interesting.
Amazing.
That's great. That's totally...
He was spectacular. Where was I going with this? But in the beginning it was very hard the idea of letting it go to another actor. And sometimes, especially with international productions, they'll ask for changes to update it or to make it relevant to, a foreign audience might not understand some reference.
To a certain reference.
And I feel, especially with a play like Fully Committed, it's important not to be precious about that and to let them change and to change things within reason. But for me, it's just been a gradual letting go, I think, is more in terms of just the response coming back than anything. It's still produced, which is, to me, that's the greatest response of all. That's amazing.
No, I went to the DPS website. The play is published by Dramatist Play Service and has been for many years. And I looked at the list of upcoming productions, and there are about...
I should do it.
There are about, 8 different productions coming up. Some at professional theaters like ATF, and some at non-professional, sort of like at a university or at a community theater or stuff like that. But it is still going strong, which is totally great.
That's amazing. And I will say, I get such, I get, that gives me great happiness. It really does. And in fact, there was a time recently where, I worked on Smash, and one of the actors' boyfriends had done, committed, in a, for a contest for one of these, I don't know, but
this sort of speech.
It might have been a speech contest. I don't know how you say it. And, which really dated me. Okay, how old must you be, and how old am I?
Sure,
Thank
that would
you.
be great.
Regular. Thank you.
Thank you.
But,
Thanks.
Things like that are always nice. It's and he, that was something he performed. Every once in a while you sort of can't believe that it has a life on its own without you. And it's like your kids, right? It's like they go out, they make their own friends, people know them that you don't know. So that's always, but I don't, in terms of how it would, what it would be like to a fresh audience now, I don't know.
Well, we'll see this summer.
That's exciting.
It is. It's
really
totally exciting. And actually, we're both going back to ATF this summer. Fully Committed is going to be happening, and I'm doing a workshop of a new play called Lady Liberty and the Donut Girl. So that's happening as well. So
same time?
I'm not sure of the exact dates. I'm going to have to look and see if they overlap. But it would be totally totally great. And thank you so much.
One roller meat and skin meat.
Please.
Thank you. We're really we're really.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
So yeah, well, I think that's it. I think that's great.
Good.
Totally. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been fun.
So, yeah.